Hello, this is Bob Woodsman of the Bob Woodsman Photography and the Rowlett Texas Photography Club. I just wanted to talk to you today about working with gradients and particularly how to create a gradient map. In working with gradients, all of the gradients that you're going to be using will have some kind of gradient map, and it's really helpful to understand how to create those maps or how to edit those maps so that you can make the best of them. We're going to take a look at gradients in general before we actually get started with some editing, and I just wanted to show you, I'm just going to put in a blank page here and fill it with, let's say fill it with white, and show you what the gradients will actually do. We're going to select the black to white gradient, and if we select this first one is just a linear gradient. And basically all you're doing is pulling your line down here and creating a gradient from one color to another. Now if you hold your shift key down, you can go either 45 or 90 degrees on these. If you don't hold your shift key down, you can go any direction you want. So we're just going to go with the shift straight down, and you can see it's gradating from this black to white. And that's basically what the gradient does. And we'll just look at each one of these. This is a circular gradient, and basically it creates a gradient from inside out. This is a angular gradient where it creates a gradient angle. You can see it goes from around the circle here for the gradient from white to black or black to white this way. The next one is I call it an inner gradient. I'm not really sure what it's called officially, but if you just go down like this, it gradates from inside out, from black to white both ways. And this gradient is the star gradient. I really never use this, but it might be good in creating gradients if you're going to do starburst or something like that, or get creative and just want to do something that looks cool. So those are the different kind of gradients that you can use the gradient maps. Now the gradient map, if you click on it here, it opens the gradient editor. And in this gradient editor, if you have the most recent CC, Photoshop CC, you'll have all these folders in here. Their previous gradient editor in previous versions of Photoshop didn't have all these folders with all these grouped in here. It may have had most of these gradients, but they were just kind of jumbled in here, or you could import them if you wanted and that sort of thing. But this they made an effort here to try to group these so that you can go in and take a look, and like if you wanted to open and look at the pinks, you just click that and you can see all the different gradients that are in the pinks or the purples and that sort of thing. So let's talk about the gradient editor here for just a second. And in the gradient editor, I'm going to pull it up here and see if I can pull it out like that so you can see it a little easier. What the gradient editor does, first of all, you have a name for each one of your gradients. The gradient type is either solid or noise, and we're going to use the solid. The smoothness tells you just how smooth this gradient is. It's at 100% gradation. If I bring it down, it's going to be a lot less of a gradation here. It'll get a lot sharper. So we're going to work with 100%. These little handles here on the side deal with the colors that you're going to be using and what kind of opacity. And if you take a look at this and you click on it, it's going to open up this bottom section down here. And what that does is it allows you to go to the color picker. If you click in here, it opens the color picker, and you can determine what color you want to gradate from. So in this case, it's using black, and it's at location 0. This goes from location 0 to 100. This is the midpoint right here. And if you wanted to delete it, you can delete it. You can have multiple colors in here, and you can delete another color. If I click on this one, it goes to this color, and you have white. You open the color picker, you can change that to whatever color. And again, it's at location 100. This up here is the opacity indicator, and if I wanted to change the opacity, I can change it so that this particular color has much less opacity at this point. So I can take this opacity and bring it down, and you can see that that turns into the little checkers in there so that it shows how opaque it is. But we're going to use it at 100%, And you can take these and just throw them away if you want to. And so in that case, I would do that. This is one that we're not going to deal with, so I don't want to mess it up. But that's kind of the way it works. This is the midpoint. If I wanted to add another color anywhere along here, all I have to do is come in here and click. Sorry. Come in here. I changed the opacity again. All you have to do is come in here and click, and then I can move this to whatever location. I just drug it off. Sorry about that. Move it to wherever I want, and you can see the location is here. And if I wanted it to be exactly in the middle, then I can add another color. Maybe I want it to be red. So I have red in here, and now I go from black to red to white is the way that the color works. So if I use this, let's just create a new one here, and we'll call it test. And we'll click on new, and now I have one here called test. So if I click on this, now it's up here in the color or in the gradient list. And if I wanted to use it for a gradient, now you can see I go from black to red to white. So that's the way the gradient maps work. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this gradient map functionality to create kind of a sun flare coming into a landscape. And we're going to try to go from this picture to something close to this picture. You can see we've added a little bit of sun flare up here. You don't really see much except for the light, but you can see that I've added some yellow in here to color grade this so that it looks more natural with the color in it. So I'm going to show you how I did that. And we have the same type of thing right here where I go from this to this. Now in both of these, it's very important to know where the sun is actually coming from. Now whenever I shot this was on an early morning in Missouri. This was at Alley Mill, and the sun is actually over here. Now you can see there's fog in the trees, so I don't want to have a sun that's overpowering here. So in adding the golden glow in here, I may have actually gone a little overboard with the golden glow in here, and it may be too much. I may want to come back down on that, because this is a foggy morning and there's fog up in here, and not a lot of that yellow is going to get through. But it actually could be sold that, the fog is over here, but the sun has come through the clouds. So, it could still work. But I'm going to show you exactly how I used the gradient map and create a gradient so that I could put a little bit of a sun look over here and then have color grading around. So let's start with that. And what I'm going to do is, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the gradient. Now we already have a gradient in here that I created, and it's this one right here. But I'm going to show you how I did it. It's called Sunburst, and right here I chose let's just start from scratch. I'll create a new one. And we'll come in here. Okay, the way you create a new one basically is take an old one and edit it and then save it to a new name. So basically what I would do is come here, go to my color picker, and choose white, because I want to start the middle of this sunburst is going to be white, pure white. So it's not actually pure white here. You can see 251, 249, 249 is not exactly pure white, but it doesn't have to be. It can be close. That's more pure white right there, 255 all the way down. So then I click here, and now I'm going to go to the middle, which is right here. You can see it's at 50% location, and I'm going to add something that's a little bit off yellow. So it's kind of a orangey looking yellow here. That was my goal in this. And it could be, you're just kind of picking something that looks like it would work. It's because we're going to go from white to kind of a yellowy color to an orange color on the outside of the sun glow. So we select that as a second color, and then I come all the way over to the right and click in here and just pick something that's kind of an orange color. And basically, you can use the exact settings I have, but it's going to be a little bit different each time you do it because of the look of the image that you're working with. But I've created this now, and I have set these. I'm going to leave the opacity at 100%, smoothness at 100. It's going to be a solid gradient type. And basically the way you save them is you come in here and change the name to be something, we'll call it custom test or something like that. And then you click new, and now I've got one here called custom test along with the one I created called starburst and the one I created called test. To delete these, you can right click and come down here and say delete gradient and say okay, and it goes away. So now I've got this one called custom test and this one called sunburst. They're both identical, so I'll wind up deleting one later. But you click OK, and now you've created this gradient map that we're going to use. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a blank layer, and on this blank layer I'm going to come in here and create this sunburst. And what I'm going to do is use my gradient tool. I'm going to use the radial type of gradient, and I'm just going to come down and create this little thing right here. Now it's going the key here is not to make this circle that you have here too big. You don't want it going off the edge, because now we're going to cut it out, and if you have to cut out part of this edge, you're going to have a line edge here that you don't want. You'll be able to make this bigger or smaller using the tree transform tool later. So the key here is don't make this too big, and you can make it even smaller than this if you want to, because like I say, you're going to change it with free transform. And the next thing I'm going to do is come over here to your circular marquee tool, or it's called elliptical marquee tool, and I'm just going to create a circle here. And if you hold the shift key down, it creates a perfect circle. Now I never get this right, so basically I just create a circle. And you may remember from previous lessons that you can't just take this and move it. If you do, you're actually moving pixels. So what you have to do is come in here on, let me do undo there and do select, transform selection. Then you can bring it in here, move it to where you want it, and basically you just want it to be a little bit outside that circle. You can even make it a little bit more. It depends on how much of this yellow outside or orangey outside that you want. And I'm going to, let's actually make it a little bit bigger. If I just hit the option and pull, I can make it bigger all the way around like that. So now I'm going to hit enter, and I have my selection. And then what you do is come down here to the bottom and select the icon for your masking tool. And when you do that, it creates a mask around it. Now, this obviously doesn't look very good at the moment, so the next thing you want to do is make sure that you have the mask selected, and with the mask selected, come up here to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and select somewhere in the neighborhood of, it's anywhere in here. 365 is what I had selected before, but you can make it less or you can make it a little bit more. So it just kind of depends on how you want it to. This thing is not moving for some reason. It depends on how much of the blur you want out on the edges. There we go. So something like that's where I'm going to stop. And you select OK. So now you've got kind of a sun-looking gradient here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and change the blending mode to screen. And you can, it depends on how much of this yellow you want, or how much of, how you want it to look. In this case, I want it to look very opaque. You could go to soft light. Soft light's going to almost make it erase, but I like to use screen in this instance. So we're going to use screen, and now I'm going to use the move tool, and I'm going to move it over here like this, and you can see that it's just almost disappeared. And now what I can do is take this, and I can use the opacity to bring it down a little bit so that you can see that there is some kind of sun coming through there like that. Now the yellow is pretty much gone on it, but it's brightness that matters right here. It's the look of the brightness of the sun coming in, and again it's muted by this fog anyway. So this, I think, looks pretty good on the on your trees up here. And again, you can play with that. You can mute it. You can add more yellow to it. You can do whatever you want to do to make it look a little bit more realistic. So the next thing we do is, to make this work, is outside the area of gradients. But what we need to do now is do a little bit of color grading to make the rest of this look like we actually have some sun rays coming in. And you could argue here that there is a light bursting through here. We could actually add some sun rays too to make it look a little bit more realistic, but right now we're just going to use a little bit of color grading. And what you would do for that, there's several ways to color grade. One of the ways that I color grade is using color balance, and that's what we're going to use here. Now, I learned this technique from Aaron Nace that teaches on Flern, and he used the curves tool, the color channels in the curve tool, which is another great way to do this. But I think it's a little bit more simple, especially for our class, to look at color balance. So I'm going to come down here and add a color balance. Now you want these underneath this by the way, because you don't want them overpowering the light that you have here. So we're going to come down here to the bottom layer, and I'm going to click, and we're going to go to color balance. And color balance tool, if you look here, you have color balance. You can affect the shadows, the midtones, or the highlights. We already know that the light is going to hit the highlights because that's where the lightest parts, where the sun's coming in from the light's coming from the sun over here, so it's going to be lighting up some of your highlights. The midtones are also going to be affected to a lesser degree, but they're also going to be affected. But the shadows are places where the sun is not getting to, so we don't want to affect these areas down in here where the sun is not hitting it. So you want to only really look at the midtones and the highlights. We're going to paint them in anyway, so it really, you could argue it doesn't really matter. But what we're going to do here is we're going to take the red, we're going to push the red quite a bit. I'm going to take it all the way up to 30. We're going to take the yellow, and I'm going to push it all the way up to 30. And then I'm going to take the highlights, and I'm going to do the same thing up to 30. And then I'm going to take yellows up to 30. Now that's quite a bit, as you can see. It's quite a bit. It's way too much probably. So, but it allows me then to come in here and bring the opacity down, and we're going to hit it probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 40%. So you could either do less up here and then less, more opacity, or you could do, what I did, more up here with very little opacity. But we're going to come in here, and I'm going to now take this mask and I'm going to invert it. You can do that with Command I as the shortcut to invert it. Now we're back to where we started from. So what we're going to do now is paint this in, and I like to paint in at about 30% so that we can do it a little at a time. So I'm going to take the brush key, I'm going to hit the 3 key to make it 30% opacity, as you can see up here. And I'm going to come in here with a soft brush, and I'm just going to kind of paint in a little bit in these areas that I think should be getting a little bit of sun. And this is going to be your call on how much you want to do, but you only want to paint in the areas that you really think there's going to be some sun coming in. And that would be in areas like this. Up here. So it just takes a little time to come in here and paint through. And I'm not going to actually do it all, but you can see how it's adding a little bit of the golden glow in here to give this its look. You don't want to reduce the fog up here, so I'm not going to hit those very much. I might put a little bit of color up there close to where they are. But you don't want to hit this up here because this is backlit. So you want the light is coming from the other side of this limb. But this probably gets a little bit of color in here like this. And down here on the bottom, probably not much color, maybe a little bit's coming in, but the light is probably coming from a fairly flat look. So if we look at this now, your green is not going to be very much. So if we look at it now, you go from here to add some of your brightness. And you could stop if you want it to be subtle, you know, you could stop anytime. But that's the way that I edited this image. Now the way, if you look at what I had before, this is where I went with it before, and I hit it pretty hard with the yellow and the golden, and maybe a little bit too much. And this is what I came up with, just what we were doing. So you can play around with that, add more color to it, maybe a little bit more up here. You can tell, you can hear me using my mouse instead of my tablet, which is a no-no. But I'm on my laptop, and it's a little bit easier just to go ahead and use the mouse instead of setting up the tablet for it. But anyway, that is about it for this, and it does a pretty good job of getting you an image like this to add a little bit of punch to it. And this image is pretty good in its own right. I mean, I like it a lot like this. But whenever you think about it, when we were there, I'm looking at this, and my vision was something more like this. I was thinking more of the really strong colors, especially the golden glow in the morning, because we were there and the sun had just come up, and you can see a little bit of fog on the water and a little bit of fog up here. It was a really beautiful place, and I think this really adds a little to the beauty. So we're going to look at a second one here, and we're going to do exactly the same thing. For the previous picture, this is where I was standing, and I was shooting out, I was shooting out in this direction. Now I'm way over here looking at the mill, and the sun, you can see the light on the trees here, so the sun is coming from this direction. So I'm going to argue that the sun could have been coming down here. If it hadn't have been for the fog, the sun could have been coming down here and would light up the mill, light up the tops of these trees, definitely light up this tree and some of these trees, and maybe even a little bit down here. So we're going to do, we're going to do exactly the same thing we did in the last image. Here is what I did earlier, to add a little bit of light here, have it coming across here at the top of these trees, lighting up the side of the mill here, a little bit of the ground, these trees over here. So you can do that by doing what I just did a minute ago with the other image. So to do that one more time, we're going to do it again just so you get to see. We're going to add a blank layer. I'm going to go to my gradient tool. We're going to make sure that we're on this gradient here, which is the one that I called starburst, or sunburst, excuse me. And once again, we created that by adding white at 0, a little bit of yellow at 50, and a little bit of orange at 100, so that it transitions across like that. So we're going to take the circular gradient tool, we're going to come down here, I'm going to hit the shift. It doesn't really matter because it's going to create a circle, so it can be crooked or whatever. And it creates this circle here. So now we're going to cut it out using the elliptical tool. We're going to come over here, create a circle, press the shift to make a perfect circle. And I'm going to take this, use the transform selection tool, move it over just a little bit. Maybe even make it a little bit bigger, pressing the option key and pulling this down to make it uniform. Okay, like that. Hit OK. And then I'm going to come down here and click on my mask tool, and that creates a mask around it. Then with my mask selected, make sure your mask is selected, go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and then select something really high, like I got 412 here. It doesn't have to be 412, it could be 300, it could be 800, 600, however high it goes. just enough to make this edge out here blur really quite a bit. So you hit enter or OK, and now I have this. You can take the move tool. Well, first let's turn it to change it to screen, and then take the move tool, move it over here, and you can move it, off the page where it's just a little bit, and I kind of like it right there. It's a little strong, so I'm going to bring the opacity down, something like that. Now I have my sun coming in, so now what I want to do is lighten or do some color grading on the rest of the image to make it work. If there's light coming in here, there should be some golden light coming in on the side of this and maybe on the tops of these trees. So once again, I'm going to go and add a color balance adjustment. In the color balance, we're going to look at midtones. I'm going to go red, and I'm just going to go 25 this time. I think 30 was a little bit too much. So we'll go 25, and then we'll go with the highlights to 25 in the red. I'll get there, 25, and then 25. So now you can see it's added this golden color, but I don't want it everywhere because it really doesn't belong in the shadows. So what we're going to do is invert the mask, Command I, and we're going to take our brush tool, again at 30%, and I'm going to take a big brush, and I'm just going to kind of sweep up here on the top, because the tops of these trees, not where the shadows are, but the tops of them, really should get some of this glow. So there we go, right there, a little bit of glow there. And if there were any clouds or anything up there, I'd probably put a little bit of glow up there. Then I'm going to come here on the left hand side over here where the trees are, and I'm going to add some glow over here. So get a little bit of there, and I'm actually going to do just a little on the edge here. Light up the part of this tree. We're going to come down here and get some of this ground. So it kind of depends on where you think it's going to be. So I'm going to take this edge all the way over here, come all the way down. Whoops. All the way back, and then kind of get the middle stuff. So it's going to get a little bit of that golden glow. Like this. Bottom part not so much, but especially the top part. Okay, like that. Maybe a little bit of the roof up here. And I'm being fairly sloppy with this. I would be a lot more careful if I were doing this for the final effect. But soft brush, again, the bottom not so much, but especially the top part. So there we go. And maybe a little more over here. So there, that is pretty much it. So now if I put these in a group, you can see the before and the after. So it just, the color grading is what really helps to sell the fact that you have a little bit of a light coming through. So that, as opposed to that, this is a little bit stronger, the one that I had done before. A little stronger here, a little bit more red in there. This is a little bit more of a glow. If you put both of them in there, it's really hot. But anyway, that is pretty much what I wanted to show you about color grading. We actually covered two topics here. We talked about the gradient map and the gradient tool. We talked about color grading with color balance. Color balance is really powerful, especially if you wanted to go in and do a little bit of color grading with a landscape like this. And give it a little bit of a golden look, or even remove a little bit of blue if there's a little blue cast. Color grading is one way to do that. So anyway, that is it with what I wanted to talk about today. Thank you so much for being with me. If you have any comments, please leave them below, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks again.